Welcome back to Season 4 of Pathways by Grenadian STEAM, the podcast where we chat with West Indian professionals at home and in the diaspora who have worked in one or more of the fields of science, technology, engineering, architecture, or mathematics to understand what led them to choose the path they did, the successes, failures, and learnings they've had along the way, and in general, what careers are out there. This season, in addition to debuting full video episodes on YouTube and Spotify to help you feel more engaged, we will be including our members, both students and professionals, in the conversations, inviting them to share their own thoughts, ideas, and experiences on the topics brought up by our guests. This is in an effort to encourage and normalize discussions among people of all ages and levels within society. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the journey on today's pathway. Today's guest is Kemron Dufont, a proactive disaster risk management specialist, environmental engineer, project manager, and technical leader. Kemron holds a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from the City Colleges of New York and a Master of Disaster Management from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Over the years, he has amassed experience working with local, national, regional, and international partners on policy issues, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, sustainable development and projects design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Kemron recently served as technical officer with NADMA, the National Disaster Management Agency here in Grenada, for a number of years, and its equivalent organization in St. Lucia, NEMO. He has recently transitioned to more of a focus on his consultancy in different aspects of disaster management. Kemron, welcome to Pathways.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually very, very excited, to speak about the different subject areas and to share my knowledge and experience with you.
Well, it's great to have you. I can't wait to get into some of it. All right, so as we get started here, we're just going to dive into a few quick questions to give people the overall framework of who it is that you are. All right. So first, where exactly did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in Boca, which is the Northeast St. George's.
All right. And can you tell us every school that you attended from childhood up to this point?
Started off at Bolio RC School. And then I went on to Presentation Brothers College. I remember that year I was I was the only student from that whole constituency to go to Presentation Brothers College.
Oh, wow.
And first year in Form 1, very few friends, that kind of stuff. And so then after Presentation Brothers College, I went on to TMI Community College, City College of New York, then the University of Auckland.
Okay. And as a student, so we're thinking about your primary, secondary school days. What kind of a student were you growing up?
Proactive, determined, ambitious.
Okay. And what was your first job or the first thing you ever did to make money?
I think we took a similar program at TMI Community College.
Uh-huh.
That was a building technology construction.
Right.
At the end of that, in our internship, we actually had to work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually my first time earning money, and that was actually doing some construction.
Okay.
It was actually the application of what we learned within the building technology program at TAMCC.
Where did you actually end up doing your job training?
His name is actually Eddie Lawrence and Associates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
A small construction firm at the time.
Got it. And your current job or profession, how would you describe that?
Well, it's actually fun. Disaster management is fun. There's lots of challenges, lots of variables, but we have to try and make the best decisions based on the information we have available.
Okay. So that's all about Kemron, how he started out, where he is now. And now let's dive into a little bit more about how you got into this disaster management and your experiences so far. You mentioned you went to PBC and then TAMCC. You did building tech. What was your initial thoughts on what you wanted to do after you left school?
So, I left TAMCC in 2003 after doing building technology. Mm-hmm. While doing architecture, I noticed the importance of a civil engineer. So I was like, if I could do a bit of architectural drawing, then better I decide to become a civil engineer. And after Hurricane Ivan in 2004, there were some part scholarships to go to the US. So I took to City College. So I took the opportunity to study civil engineering. And while there, I got more insight about environmental engineering, which was an evolving field at the time.
Yeah.
I think our class was made the first to graduate at City College.
Okay.
So then I moved from civil engineering to environmental engineering.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea to keep the ecosystem together and all that kind of stuff. While studying environmental engineering and started working in the field, then I started developing a love for helping people, which is actually a big part of disaster management. And then when you start getting into the theoretical aspect and all those things, you realize it's not just about helping people, but about frameworks, systems, processes, and it helps me put everything into perspective that I've learned.
Right. You basically discovered this field after you had already started on your path or where you thought you were going to go. So is there anything that you discovered about environmental engineering or disaster management after getting into it that you didn't really expect or you didn't know about?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is a shock, like in terms of people respecting people within the field. In the Caribbean and so. What I've learned, a lot of it is policy driven, in the sense that a lot of countries, the focus is actually on development. But another country will say development at what cost. The amount of experience and being impactful as an environmental engineer has a lot to do with the countries you operate. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I've learned as an environmental engineer. What I've learned in disaster management is that developing relationships in peacetime is very critical in disaster situations. And I know about that even as recently as in St. Vincent, respond to that volcano. And so that's one of the areas, that's what I've really learned in terms of disaster management.
Okay. So taking it back a little bit, when you were going through that first degree of undergrad environmental engineering, what was some of the things that you were learning about?
A lot of the hazards, how they are formed. So it really gave like the earthquakes and so how you'll be able to measure a lot of those different types of hazards and so. Okay. We looked at a lot about water quality, environmental impact assessments. We did some hydraulics, some hydrology, and air quality was actually a big aspect too, like living in an urban city and so. So it gives a very holistic understanding, which actually provide a kind of platform for disaster management, because based on the hazards, you know what to do within disaster management to reduce the impact.
Right. So then once you completed that first degree, correct me if I'm wrong, but you then returned home?
Yes.
Pretty soon after? Okay. Yes. So then how were you able to, what was your experience in then returning home and trying to apply the knowledge that you had gained?
Yes, well, I would not trade the experience for anything. Returning home, the challenges of actually trying to get a job within your field. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of challenges to actually get your feet wet.
Okay.
Right. But once you start getting your feet wet and then you start getting, like once you get a job, your dream job and so, and you start applying knowledge and so, then the feeling, you start having a greater love and appreciation for the field. And as I think someone advised me before, like sometimes it's better to work in your field before you do a master's in it. Because when you actually go do the master's, then you know specifically which problems you want to solve and so.
Right. That's something, honestly, I don't have my master's yet. And that's something I've always said that I don't want to just jump into a master's just for the sake of it. I want to have a passion for it or a reason for why I want to learn a specific thing. Yes. So you talked about like being able to find your dream job when you came back and getting your feet wet. What was even available to you at the time?
Well, that's a very good question. Fortunately, I was able to work with NADMA. Actually, when I went back home from, I taught for a little bit before I got into my field.
Okay. Right? Yeah.
Some of the opportunities that were available is actually to work within the National Disaster Management Office, or to meet a volunteer with an organization like Red Cross. What I've noticed from returning home is that sometimes you may need to work on a national level, then try to move on to a regional level, then an international platform.
Okay. So you said you had taught for a couple of years before getting into NADMA. Then how did you get into NADMA? Was it just an application?
I think there was a freeze. There was actually a freeze on hiring. Okay. Before working at NADMA, I was trying to get to work within the Ministry of the Environment. Mm-hmm. So, applying over and over and over and over, and then, But my situation was simply a transfer because, I'm on a permanent establishment. So while I'm working with different consultants and so within NADMA, I noticed that what they have that I don't is really a master's in order to do consultancy and so. So that's why I saw the need for me to go and get the master's with the experience and be able to do consultancy. Okay.
So you saw that once you started working in the field itself. Got it. All right. So for those listening who may not understand exactly what you do as a disaster management professional, what does the job entail? Because it's not every day that we're in a disaster, right? So what do you actually do, as you call it, during peacetime?
So disaster management, the best way to put it is like you actually have to run the country in worst situations. Mm-hmm. So in peacetime, you need to make sure you have all the systems and processes and everything in place. So whenever there's an impact of any event, the system can just kick in and function smoothly. And when the system starts functioning, you look at ways to improve the system as quickly as possible. Okay. So just to get an idea, disaster management is very broad. We have the preventative response recovery sides to it. Those are the main sides of it. So you can be working under any team any day. But it's very fluid. It's working 24/7. Any hazard can happen impact anytime. And people expect you to be able to respond.
Yeah. Are there a lot of drills, or how do you create a system and then know that it will work before the disaster hits?
Well, first of all, we must identify the specific hazards that can impact the actual location. Okay. And then you actually look at mitigative measures and so for specific hazards. But within the last few years, you'll have seen how disasters will have expanded to include pandemics and all the other types of hazards. And that's really a concern because with the economic disaster, also with inflation and so, you may want to ask yourself, how can countries respond, if the island's impacted by a hurricane at this stage? If people have to buy food, the cost of transportation, the cost to rebuild.
Right.
Those are the things we have to think about even futuristically as disaster management. Mm-hmm. So we always have to be thinking about ways to improve the system and all the type of disasters. Because if you think about it from your perspective, no matter what type of disaster, there's an expectation from NADMA to respond to it.
That's true. So, here's a question. How do you define disaster? Because if I think about it, I think of, volcanoes, hurricanes, large-scale natural disasters, earthquakes, things like that. But I'm sure that there's smaller, more everyday scenarios that would also require your type of expertise. So what are some of those things?
A disaster is simply whenever the system becomes overwhelmed.
Okay.
So if you have someone die within your family or so, that could be a family disaster. You could have community disasters, village disasters, national disasters, and so. It's just whenever the system becomes overwhelmed for a period of time. And then the purpose when you declare state of emergency is to restore the situation to normalcy.
Got it. Okay, good to know. So how exactly do you define the word disaster?
Okay, so disaster, is whenever a system becomes overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. So usually you have a hazard which has a potential to have any negative impact.
Okay.
And then whenever the system becomes overwhelmed, so a hazard can be a earthquake, volcano, hurricane. It can be also man-made by negligence or so. So a hazard is whenever a system becomes overwhelmed, which has negative consequences.
Okay.
And I'm happy you asked that question because sometimes people, they use the words interchangeably, which is a crisis, a disaster, emergency. So it's very, yeah.
So could you explain that difference for us a little bit?
Well, emergency is on a smaller scale.
Okay.
So you have a smaller scale. A disaster is when you may have a national impact, and a crisis when you have beyond a national impact. So if you remember Irma and Maria, when you have 5-6 countries affected, that will have been a sort of regional crisis.
Okay.
But if one country is impacted, then you can consider it a natural disaster.
Okay.
And then what is a disaster for us in the region would not be a disaster for in another part of the world.
As in that wouldn't exist. So like other
because of the scale. Because like for instance in Hurricane Ivan case, we only had 39 persons who died when the hurricane impacted. And another country may say if only 39 persons died, then that's not a big disaster. But it was a major impact to us.
Right. Okay.
It's very subjective.
Yeah.
But these a lot with scale.
Got it. Okay. So based on all of that, what are some of your observations on how disaster management is handled here in Grenada in the Caribbean? And you could use, the recent eruption in St. Vincent or Ivan, COVID, any of those things as examples.
Yes, disaster management in the region. Well, there is an umbrella body which is called CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And they are the ones who more or less create a framework for the other islands to follow.
Okay.
I believe there is up to 19 participating states within the CDEMA system. So that's a system that governs disaster management within the Caribbean. What I have noticed is that the system that we use in the Caribbean, it needs to be more agile, and it needs to be there needs to be a research component that will help improve the system as quickly as possible. Disasters are occurring faster and the system is changing. So if disasters is outpacing the system, then we're creating a bigger disaster. But what I can say specifically about disaster management in Grenada is that there needs to be a great focus on the human resource to making sure that we have the right fit in key areas, because running a country on a day-to-day level is one, but when you have to make decisions on very short notice with limited information, it becomes very difficult. So you more or less need the cream of the crop to work with, and then there must be some level of budgetary allocations to make sure that the persons, they can actually function. And communication is very important from the ground up and from the top bottom to make sure that there's a flow of information and so that resources can be allocated properly.
Right. And that's something, have you seen the responses? Because I know you've worked also in St. Lucia and so on, across the Caribbean islands to be somewhat the same, or is there a big difference?
Before we get to that question, I just want to, with disaster management, I want to tie in the St. Vincent part here a little bit.
Okay.
As an example. So as related specifically to St. Vincent, the relief operation in St. Vincent, having established relationships in peacetime is very critical, because we have the politicians that talk to each other from country to country.
Right.
And then we have the technical people who have to get the systems working. So the policymakers, they'll talk to the regional partners, they'll talk to the missions, different places and so. So one of the benefits of that system is a synergy, because my experience in St. Vincent is that when that volcano started erupting, because I've been to St. Vincent a few times, that's something else people have to consider with the carriers. Like in my case, I've been to most of the Caribbean islands. So if an island is impacted, you have an idea of where it's impacted, the people, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it really helps with disaster management when you have to make decisions, right? So specifically for St. Vincent, when that volcano started erupting, well, first of all, we'll have get information at our office that there are a lot of tremors and so. So once there are tremors, we can start activating, what needs to be done and so.
Okay.
And then you have all the what if questions. What if this? What if that? What if the volcano? How long is it going to last? And all that kind of stuff and so. And then, thinking about the volcano erupted, then you have the water supplies cut off. And Grenada is really like a staging area. Well, was really an area for a staging for St. Vincent. And then you also have to consider the actual Grenadines. So I believe about 32 islands. So you have to think about from Union, Myro, Canawan, Bequia. So like you have all these factors to take into consideration.
Right.
And you also have to keep in mind this may be occurring within a pandemic and all those things. And you have to be prepared for hurricane season. So the point I'm making is that disaster management is very, very complex, and having a good fundamental understanding of disaster management really helps. And to make a recommendation, New Zealand, where I chose to study, they are very advanced in terms of their knowledge. If you notice with this pandemic, we looked at a lot with New Zealand, what New Zealand is doing. They have a female prime minister, So all those things is what I must say within disaster management that is very, very complex, but having a good understanding in peacetime, it really helps operations when a disaster kicks in.
And so all of this work you did with St. Vincent, that was as part of NADMA or SEDIMA, or what was your role?
That was part of NADMA. In terms of, and then even Maria in Dominica.
Okay, is that the NADMA equivalent?
No, Maria is actually the storm that impacted Dominica.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Maria having to work the operations too. And what I must mention, sometimes you have to build systems along the way, because that's one of the gaps within our system. I must mention, we have a lot of documentation, but few people read the documents. So whenever we're impacted by any particular disaster, people may not know what to do.
Yeah.
So then we have to be reading, staying on top, and actually building the system as we go along. And that's why we incorporated even the prisoners to help us pack those barrels and sort of ship off to Dominica. Okay. And while on that, I must add also with Maria and Irma, that Grenada was the first country to ship aid to BVI, right? And that's some of the decisions that we have to make, because when some of the planes flew down to Grenada to escape the hurricane up there, and then when they were flying back up, we had to make the decision that whenever people, even though people may think they have money up there and so, but when you need water, on a day you need some water, you really need it, Yeah. So we just packed the planes, and those were the first relief to be sent to BVI from Grenada.
Okay, so it was like a real-time response to what was happening and what resources we had available.
So that's why it's very critical in peacetime to know what resources you have available, to have key human resources, to have, capital in case you need to move your goods along and so, and relationships.
Wow, that's a good example.
And then lastly, I know you'll be cutting up. As it relates specifically to St. Vincent, we have, so sometimes, like I remember specifically Guyana, because that's where the environmental engineering, all them things come in to kind of really understand. Like I have to be understanding, the situation to the best of your ability to actually make decisions. So Guyana had called and they want to know, can we fly our planes to Grenada with relief, the bigger aircrafts, and then take the smaller aircraft and fly over the aid to St. Vincent? Yeah. But then they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it because there was a no-fly zone over St. Vincent at the time. So the point I'm making is that within disaster management, you have a lot of variables, and the variables for St. Vincent is different to a pandemic, is different to a hurricane, is different to an earthquake. And
yeah, that's a lot. And so it's in any of these disasters, it's never one. You can't just consider the local, like you can't just consider Grenada's situation, because you have to think about things getting into Grenada and where they have to pass through and all of that. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a lot.
And then also in terms of sharing knowledge, because I know Barbados had reached out as it relates to, with the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent. They've never had to, it's not a volcanic island.
True.
So, that's why I said, and having that relationship where we could call the director and say, and there's a lot of synergy among the directors and so on, usually the technical people. So disaster management, that's one of the main strengths within disaster management within the region. But as related to strengthening, we need to have the system agile to improve, to cater for the needs of our people.
Got it. Okay. All right. So you mentioned that you got into the master's degree because you had started working and you realized that, everyone around you had a master's and they were then able to do consultancy. So what was your next step once you made that realization to actually choosing a degree? And then how did you end up in New Zealand, of all places?
Yes. Of all places.
Of all places.
Yes. So New Zealand, when I decided to apply to do the master's, I looked at New Zealand mainly because I didn't know anything too much about New Zealand, to be honest. But I noticed they have similar hazards to the Caribbean, like with the earthquakes and so. So it was between New Zealand and Australia that was really offering Commonwealth scholarships.
Okay.
So it had kind of limit the focus. And if you want to study disaster management and do proper research and so, then it's best to get a world-renowned school. And it happened to be in New Zealand, Auckland, the University of Auckland. It's one of the best decisions that I made, going there to study. It was a full scholarship from New Zealand government. So I must thank the taxpayers of New Zealand for that. But it was really a wonderful experience because New Zealand has a wealth of knowledge. They believe in created knowledge. I have no regrets. And very important, whenever I choose a study, which I'm learning now, is that it's important to study in places or at institutions that is accredited. Because if you have to move like to the UK or Canada or wherever, at least your qualification would be recognized.
True. All right. So now we'll maybe take a little bit of a shift in the conversation, because in preparing for this chat, you noted that you made a shift yourself out of maybe mainstream disaster management into this new role that you call it following your passion.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to get too much into it before we actually started talking here, because I wanted to uncover the story with the audience. Keep listening. We'll be right back after a short break. This season of Pathways is brought to you by Telesford Countertop and General Construction Services, your #1 source for quartz and solid surface. Their services are not only limited to countertops, their team builds homes, cabinets, vanities, does 3D images, renovations, and quantity estimates. Telesford Countertop and General Construction Services' mission statement is pride and delivery upon customer satisfaction. Contact them today at 435-0133 to get started on your construction project. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on and what the pivot point was for you that created that shift.
So what I'm working on right now is moving from STEAM, as we know it, to being did an iteration on it and creating a new form of STEAM.
Okay.
And I hope one day can be reflected within your whole organization.
Okay.
So the STEAM, as the acronym stands for, is science, technology, engineering. I see you put in architecture, but I say arts and mathematics.
Yeah.
And as the world continues to evolve, we notice that there is a shift in thinking, there is a shift in mindset, there's a shift in the learning, the way we do things, and so. So the new STEAM is actually sustainability, because any project that we focus on, it must be sustainable. Technology, if we have products and so, to make sure we can reach our clients. E for entrepreneurship. A lot of people are engineers, but if they're not entrepreneurs to sell themselves, and so they just end up being bright persons who have to work with for people. The A, I'll switch it from architecture to arts.
Okay.
And then the M is more for mathematics. I like to DJ, so I'll say music with it.
Okay.
But so that's the main focus. The main focus is, how do I put all my skill set together into form a one Kemron, a one me? And I've been working on developing the necessary skill sets, building my capacity to function within that new role. Because you may agree, if we have to go back to school today, a lot of what we learn will be new. And even when we graduate, and so we have to continue to be evolving and changing, and so.
Very true. So this is your take on STEAM. This is the Kemron Dufont STEAM.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you are doing some work with basically opening pathways, no pun intended, opening up paths for local farmers to get their produce out on international markets. Mm-hmm. Right? So what is that you're working on?
Yeah. So if you notice, there's a big shift in the world to more natural products and so organic products. Mm-hmm. Right? And then from my understanding of disaster management, again, the whole issue of food security.
Yeah.
I got informed with seamoss by assisting farmers, how to use more environmentally practices and so for the dry process and so. And when I had to do research and help them develop a proposal, I started learning about the health benefits of seamoss. And within disaster management, I believe that seamoss will be the relief food, because seamoss yields so much. And I firmly believe that seamoss is a food that can feed the world.
Okay. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. So, and then when I looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, seamoss is able to hit all of them. So I think it's just a matter of time before the world started recognizing seamoss. Similar to marijuana. People start recognizing all the benefits once people are able to do the research and so.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm focused on the seamoss start. But Grenada, we have a lot of products on island that has a lot of nutritional benefits and economic gains and so. And my focus working with vulnerable people, the farmers and all those people, is really to have access market. And once people have economic empowerment, then they're able to do as much as they want to help build their resilience and build their capacity and so.
Yeah. So does this project you're working on, it's called Revivify?
Yes, right? That's Revivify. It's actually a company registered.
Okay.
Because we're going through all the entire legal process to make sure everything is done properly.
Right.
So Revivify is a registered Canadian company that is responsible for distributing Grenadian products globally through the platform, the internet platform, and so.
So in addition to just the distribution and I don't know if there's a manufacturing aspect of it, does that include some type of research into all these different benefits that you were talking about?
Yeah. So that's why I'm happy about doing this project, because even as an environmental engineer, I'm having to work with the seamoss in a whole marine ecosystem and so. I'm able to apply a lot of my knowledge because we work from the farmers to providing customer service and so. So through the entire process, we have to be working with all the key stakeholders and so.
So everyone along that value chain, basically.
So my main role is quality assurance.
Okay. And you have a processing plant in Canada that you work out of, or?
Well, the system is actually evolving because we have to know their requirements and actually meet their requirements. But so far we have some stores and so that actually taken the product already. But the bigger stores and so, is a longer process and that kind of stuff. But we are willing to do what it takes to make sure we have product Grenada on the shelves, in North America and other places.
Yeah.
And then just to add, because being proactive, this will actually help reduce vulnerability. Because if people have more money, they're able to build stronger houses, they're able to, so it helps in terms of the preventative side of disaster, which is a shift because most of disaster management is known for response. But in terms of building economic resilience for persons to be better prepared for disasters.
So the preparation side of it. All right. So what do you think at this stage, and you may not have that foresight, but what do you think the next 5 to 10 years could do for your career? Or what do you see for it right now? What direction you want to take things?
Okay. I'm happy that you asked that question. Currently, right, the Caribbean is a bit tricky, and I think young persons should be aware of this. We like what's foreign. We like what's foreign, right? So being a Grenadian also, I had interviews last year, December, to be an advisor to the province of Ontario, right? And then I was unable to I believe I didn't get the job because I'm not a Canadian, for instance, right? I had interviews with UNDP and so to head disaster recovery for 9 countries. And I'm actually a disaster recovery specialist. That's my area of focus, disaster recovery. So I believe by building myself through the whole consultancy and so, we already know if we work in disaster relief, we have a food to feed the people, which is seamoss. So creating that awareness and so. I believe in the next 5 years, most of what that I've been working on is going to come together, and for people to have a better understanding of what's taking place. I know I warn the people, and then they didn't listen, and we see what happened. Yeah. Because the whole idea of food security, inflation. So I believe in 5 years' time that a lot of what I'm working on will come to fruit, will bear fruit. And I firmly believe that as a Grenadian, we can move Grenada and make it the Singapore of the Caribbean. We have, if we look at our natural, just from a renewable energy, we have the potential for geothermal, for wind turbines, for all kind of different energy. So we have what it takes as a country. So I'm hoping that if Grenada decide to move in that direction, that can be part of it. But as an individual, I'm open to work any part of the world that have a disaster. And right now the world full with disasters and so.
Okay, I see. And what is a piece of advice that you would share with a young student who's coming up, either looking to get into a similar industry or maybe just trying to find their way?
Advice. Well, I have a godchild. I always give her all kind of crazy advice.
Okay, let's hear some of it.
She's in Form 5 actually in convent. So I believe mentorship, and maybe through your platform too, offer a lot more mentorship, because we have a lot of students are actually limited in terms of scope, in terms of understanding what's out there. The world is changing very quickly. Jobs and so as required is changing as quickly, you know. Yeah. So with the right mentorship, persons would be aware of where the world is trending so they can choose their careers along those lines and so. And all the other aspects, you know, the passion, the love, and make sure you can pay your bills and everything. So.
Yeah. Seek mentorship, people. All right. Well, Kemron, I think this was a really interesting conversation. I'm really glad I got to finally sit down and talk. And I hope that those listening or watching were able to take something from it and will maybe do some research into disaster management if that's something they might be interested in.
Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm more than happy to be back to answer any question or so. I'm also open to mentor anyone, to provide assistance, any advice or so that person's may need to take it to the next level.
So what's a good place that people can reach you if they have any questions?
They can send me an email, Kemron Dufont at Gmail. I'm very open to mentor persons, to provide any advice. If persons have interest in doing a master's and looking to go study in New Zealand, I'm not sure if the boys open up with the whole COVID, but any advice in terms of the career path and so, you can just send me an email and then we'll take it from there.
All right, great. Well, thanks again. And to the listeners, thank you for joining us on today's Pathway.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. We would absolutely appreciate your comments and feedback as we try to make this podcast more beneficial for you, our listeners and watchers. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a minute to press the review button, let us know how we're doing, and let others know that this is something that's worth their time. We also love to see your comments and engagement on social media, so head over to the post and let us know what you think about this latest episode.